Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. My name is Kevin Castley. Tonight we are streaming to YouTube and Twitch. You're watching Superpower Broadcasting, and we are going to cover the oil war between Fascist Russia and Saudi Arabia, as well as usual, the CCP virus, the coronavirus, which is basically, infecting the world at the moment. Today we are joined by Anthony Roberto, as well as Anthony Avis du Bisson, who will provide their perspective and expertise later on when we go to the panel segment of this program. Thank you to those who are with us tonight. We already have 6 viewers. I appreciate that. And we may also be joined by Henry of American Madhouse at a later point tonight. You will notice that the background and appearance of the program appears different now. I've been using the premium version of StreamYard now in order to broadcast this, and kind of playing around with it, try to get a feel for what works. We got the Chiron going at the bottom. It's going to be good. So let's get into the substance of the stream tonight. So. If you've been paying attention, if you're somebody who drives or whatnot, or even if you notice, prices of food or whatnot in particular context, you'll notice that gas is cheap right now, super cheap. To give you kind of a benchmark, in the area that I used to live in, for example, in terms of U.S. gallons, it used to be about $7 a U.S. gallon where I live, and now we're down to about $4 a U.S. gallon, which is a pretty significant drop. In terms of the actual world price of oil, though, in terms of the average there, we're looking at an approximate price per barrel of about $20, which is substantially significant. That's big, because the 2 biggest players in this sector of the world economy are, of course, Moscow and Riyadh. And we know that both states are very, very heavily dependent on the export of natural resources to bankroll their government budgets. And this is significant because Fascist Russia was defeated during the last Cold War, in part due to the Reagan administration's focus upon spending between 6 to upwards of 8% of U.S. GDP on defense. The Soviet Union, in contrast, was spending between 22 and 25% of their economy, their GDP, on the military, and they still could not keep up with the United States, and it brought about their bankruptcy. Well, in this gas war, both states, in this case Saudi Arabia and Fascist Russia, are heavily reliant on natural resources as a massive segment of their economy. In Saudi Arabia, it's over 90%. In Fascist Russia, it's about 60% in terms of the government revenues. However, Fascist Russia is in a very weak position here. If you've seen how the ruble has dropped relative to the United States dollar, for example, you'll know that the Russian economy is in a very, very bad point. It's essentially the worst that's been in the last 5 years. It's on par with the 2014 financial crisis that they experienced there. And I'm going to make the argument here, and I will have a more in-depth video apart from just a live stream, exploring how if the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is serious and ambitious and committed to pursuing this gas war to the ultimate end, we will see the Saudi economy be hurt in the short run. Absolutely. There's no question about that. But we will see the biggest competitor, Fascist Russia, go into bankruptcy. It will be 1991 2.0. It will be the collapse of the Putin system, because when the pensions are no longer able to be paid and the welfare system is no longer able to operate and simple government services are no longer able to be bankrolled, you'll have chaos and mayhem in the streets. It'll be a revolution, essentially. And in Saudi Arabia, there is a much more financial financial foundation that MBS is able to stand on for 2 reasons. the actual cost of producing a barrel in Saudi Arabia is much cheaper than it is in fascist Russia for a couple of reasons. I've talked about this before on this program. The first of which is that it's just easier due to geography. Fascist Russia doesn't have the most opportune geography for oil exploration. Saudi Arabia is in a very accessible desert. It's a great spawning point. You know, if you want to be if you want to be a king of oil, right? And as well, there is the political angle of it, which is that fascist Russia is under significant sanctions that prohibit the companies with the know-how to make it more accessible, such as ExxonMobil, from doing business there. ExxonMobil and other companies are, they're able to, through Saudi Aramco and other sorts of aspects, they're able to offer their expertise in terms of getting at Saudi oil. Saudi has U.S. investment that Russia lacks, and those companies are able to get at the oil a lot easier. And so Saudi Arabia, if they are in a short-term mode, they'll continue this, they'll play chicken, and then they'll back down. But if they really want to take the final victory and corner the world market in the long run, they'll see this through to the death of fascist Russia. And that will be a good day, because it will mean that for a second time, that system, the Putin system, the KGB system, would have been defeated without having to fire a shot. And it would show that if we got serious about actually taking significant economic action, we can make a real difference in the world without having to do war. And that leads me to the second point of this stream, which is regarding the virus, regarding the CCP virus. We've talked about in the past before here, myself, some of the guests that have featured on this program have talked about how it would be a wise course of action to pursue substantial, at minimum, economic sanctions, as well as up to demanding reparations or issuing a full blockade against communist China. Well, if we can see the Saudi Arabian government pursuing a strong course of economic warfare against their rival and seeing them win, I think that would set in motion the ability for us, our leaders in the West, to have the imagination to actually get out of this status quo way of thinking of, well, we have to trade with them, they make our cheap stuff, to, oh, we can actually win this. We can actually win this and make the world a better place. And so, to summarize this in terms of this preambulatory part of the stream, we're in a very hectic and chaotic time, but it's very possible that the world that comes out of this will look very different quite shortly, and it could look ultimately much more stable and better from the perspective of the Western order. So thank you. Now we're going to go and open it up to the panel. Thank you to Anthony Roberto and Anthony Avis-Dubisson for being with us tonight. Welcome. How are you guys doing?
All right.
I'm doing good as well.
Oh man. So thanks for coming on. So in terms of the oil war and everything that's going on, have you guys, where you are, noticed significant drop in terms of gas prices and just general prices associated with oil products and whatnot?
I only went out once to go get groceries for me and my brother. I noticed it was like under $2 for a little bit or something like that, something crazy like that. Unfortunately, I didn't have to get gas. I just so happened to drive by a couple of gas stations, like two, and I just noticed when I was at the stoplight, oh, look at the prices, they're so low. I know for the Trump administration, there's been some problems because he has mentioned in in the press briefings that ExxonMobil's been taking a huge hit by this, because when a lot of oil is flooded into the market, a lot of our industries, a lot of our companies here who also produce oil, they get hurt too, to some varying degree. And I guess Trump wanted that to stop for the oil war. And from the last I heard, Putin backed down with Saudi Arabia. So that's as much. I didn't follow it very closely, but that's as much as I know about the oil conflict. But
yeah. Well, yeah, no, thanks for that. We'll go to Anthony Avis-Dubisson now.
Yeah, over here, I have not really noticed differences in prices when it comes to petrol prices and other, I guess, prices when it comes to fuel in general, because over here they still engage in price gouging in some petrol areas, like some petrol stations. They engage in price gouging. I've actually heard complaints on the radio about price gouging, where essentially you have individual petrol stations that are raising the prices despite the fact that prices are lowering. And actually, someone commented on the radio a couple of actually no, probably when this thing started about a couple of months back, before even the coronavirus, where he had noticed the fact that in America that oil prices had reduced and gas prices had reduced, whereas over here in Australia, our prices sort of stayed the same, and sometimes it's even got a little bit higher in other
Oh,
states. So that is an issue. But other than that, I've not really been paying attention to that front, because when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Russia and this whole oil thing that they're going against, it's also going to have effects on Turkey and other nations as well. And there's a sort of this, especially from the perspective of the Turkish government under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he said that this these coming economic ramifications, these coming economic circumstances will breed a new vision for Turkey to save Turkey's already crashing lira. I know that's, as you know, that's from an autocrat, but it does reveal just what some of these leaders are thinking about that. So that's sort of like my contribution on that front, really.
right. Yeah, no, it's an interesting sort of situation because of course, it should be noted that there is objectively a real decrease in demand for oil right now, which that adds to this because there have been these sorts of price wars on oil in the past, but it was always in the context of an economic situation worldwide where oil was still being demanded. But now you have an interesting blend of things where there's the oil war between Russia and Saudi Arabia coupled with a reduced demand for it. So that's I think part of the reason why the prices have gotten as low as they have because if this were under a natural circumstance where Moscow and Riyadh were still competing with each other, oil would still be lower than it was a year ago price wise because of the reduced demand. You'd have to lower the price to equate it, but now we're coupling it with this, and I think part of it is the Saudi initiative to kind of seize this as a moment to corner a larger share of the market. They're not doing this for any sort of humanitarian reasons because Russia's bad or whatever on gay rights or whatnot. That's obviously not the issue, right? To the audience, the reason why they're pursuing this is because they want to gain a closer approximation to having oligopoly power with their allies essentially against Russia. So we also have Henry now in the studio. We're going to welcome Henry of American Madhouse here. Thanks for coming on the program, Henry.
Oh, hey, what's up?
Yo, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good. Not bad. How about you guys?
All right.
Good.
It's pretty good. We already got 17 people here watching right now. It's pretty good. We already got
Oh, wow.
lively conversation going on.
I
Yeah,
oh, I will say this real quick when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Russia. Um, from what I know, obviously, like Saudi Arabia has wanted to corner the market for a while. I think it's interesting that they picked this exact moment to do something like that. Because I've always found that kind of interesting. But I do wonder though, if out of this, if like Russia will maybe try to supply more oil to maybe like Iran or Central Asian states or whatever. Like I wonder if it's going to shift maybe some of the geopolitical focus as far as like oil supply goes, who they're going to supply it to, because apparently I guess Putin kind of backed down, and a lot of this has kind of been under the rug a little bit,
yeah,
because throughout March there's a whole oil thing, the whole oil war, but like we haven't seen it in a week or so. So I'm wondering if Putin has another strategy up his sleeve he wants to do, or if he's just going to leave it be. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does in the
Oh,
future.
yeah.
And I
No,
know
for sure.
and I know I've talked about this on Twitter too. There's countries like Belarus or other countries that are very heavily reliant on oil. Will this affect their relationship? How's the export market going to go? So, lots of interesting developments.
Yeah, I think, this probably would have even been a better stream to do even a week ago, but I was focused on covering just the overall effects of the pandemic at that point. But I did want to do a stream more focused on the oil war component to this, because it is interesting. I've made the case in the past before that fascist Russia, they're a system that it's been proven that you can defeat economically. The Soviet Union was brought to its knees based on essentially economic warfare, and I think that this should serve as a reminder to people to kind of highlight how the arguments that you'll see from the supporters, many of the supporters of people like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard, Tanky Tulsi, the fans of Kremlin Kyle Kulinski, these types of people, they'll make the point that Saudi Arabia is actually an enemy, that Saudi Arabia has no common interest with us, that they do 9/11 and all this stuff, and just a bunch of basically slanderous allegations against them, because of course bin Laden was exiled from Saudi Arabia. But this is a point to note here, where it's another data point where Saudi Arabia is acting in our interests, because we have an interest to see Russia weak and to see their economy crippled. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. And the prince in Saudi Arabia, he made a statement recently saying how this was not designed to hurt U.S. suppliers. It was targeting, Russia, basically. And I believe them on that. I don't think they were doing this to hurt anybody in the United States. It's a global market. There are going to be bystanders that get caught up in it, companies and whatnot, that they actually see their bottom line get hurt by this, for sure. But at the end of the day, Putin's bottom line is severely damaged. So yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say that when it comes to Saudi Arabia and the United States, for Saudi Arabia, the United States is probably its strongest ally, and it has been its strongest ally for quite a while, since it's the founding of the Saudi state.
Mm-hmm.
So doing anything against America, especially in this you could say post-ISIS phase in the Middle East, would just be absolutely mad for Saudi Arabia. So because many people actually forget that the United States doesn't really need Saudi Arabia. It's more that Saudi Arabia needs the United States. So it has a vested interest in keeping that relationship well and truly solid between each other.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a myth out there that everything that the United States does in terms of foreign policy is all about oil. Yet the United States is, for all intents and purposes, essentially independent when it comes to oil. The U.S. has a lot of oil in Alaska, the Gulf of Mexico, elsewhere. The United States could, if the U.S. basically did away with some of the environmental regulations, the U.S. could basically be fully self-sufficient on oil. It's not about that. It's having a partner in the region that will help keep things stable when it comes to issues such as the alliance with Israel and other U.S. partners. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, yeah, you're right. Saudi Arabia definitely needs the support of the United States, because they're facing Iran, who has the alliance basically of China and Russia working against them. So they have to have a superpower on their side. Otherwise, they have the lower hand. Going into the gas wars, Saudi Arabia did have the upper hand, and Russia, of course, has been backing down, but which was kind of inevitable. But yeah,
I just want to quickly just add one last point to this, not to go too much on a tangent. But it must be noted that Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, in its sort of Cold War against Iran, it needs the backing of the United States in this effort. It's already repaired bilateral relations with Israel to do this, and with other states that it used to have a little bit of animosity towards, because it wants to secure itself as not only the leader of the GCC, but also as a firm American partner, because they saw during the Obama administration years the drift away from Saudi Arabia and towards the normalization of Iran, which is a existential threat for Saudi Arabia. So this is especially important these times, where we must just remember that Saudi Arabia almost got a wake-up call from the Obama administration when it tried to normalize bilateral relations with Iran. So now it's trying to do its part, especially Saudi Arabia, to not only do the whole 2030 vision of reform, but also to make sure that it can keep the United States by its side without the United States drifting towards Iran.
Yeah.
Right. I would say one more thing for Saudi Arabia. I think the other thing too is like we look at Saudi Arabia for its 2030 vision. Like they're doing a lot more than what Russia's doing. You know, like Russia's kind of like they have like some stuff like with natural resources, but they're not trying to really drift away from oil as much as Saudi Arabia, because the 2030 vision, you know, they're trying to get tourism. They have like an investment initiative, I think, with I believe it's with housing or something like that, or with real estate. So they're trying to do that. You know, they're trying to get more into green energy. I believe electricity and I think wind is like a big thing. So there's different sectors they're trying to open up, especially the entertainment sector. They're really trying to open up in Saudi Arabia, and you could see how they're really trying to expand their economy like more globally. But Russia isn't really doing as much though. So like inevitably, like Russia's going to be losing a lot of this because you know Russia's kind of like still on the backs of oligarchs. You know,
Well, exactly.
So, right? Because
Exactly.
they're not trying to develop or really improve anything. It's just the same old Soviet hospitals.
Exactly. And, you know, and this is a point that needs to be mentioned, you know, in terms of that outreach to expand to areas such as entertainment and everything. One thing that comes along with the broadening of the economy and the diversity of economic sectors is that you do get some more socially liberal attitudes in the country. And in Saudi Arabia, even though it's very small, very minor progress, you can kind of laugh about how like, oh, well, women are finally allowed to drive or whatever. Well, yeah, that's a slight step in the right direction. Fascist Russia has actually gone backwards. Like the laws that they've been passing lately in terms of allowing people, like allowing husbands to beat their wives without the wives being allowed to call the police, that kind of stuff. Fascist Russia is going backwards, while Saudi Arabia is slowly moving forwards. Like I'll take a slow movement forwards over just going, you know, full paleo conservative like Fascist Russia's.
I just want to, as you mentioned that point, just quickly mention this before I guess we move on to the next segment and that. But I do want to say that I have, for example, I've written actually a couple articles, actually no, one notable article on the male guardianship system. But I've talked to plenty of Saudi women, for example, nowadays, that you can see a contrast between 2016 and now. Since MBS has taken over, and of course MBS is not all perfect, as you know, but since he's taken over, the country has reformed a lot of its social policies towards women. Women can drive now, as you mentioned. Women have more rights now to travel abroad, as you mentioned. These steps are important because Saudi Arabia essentially is moving in the direction of other GCC states. So it's moving in the direction of Kuwait, although it won't ever be as good as Kuwait, I guess, in terms of its policies and like that. But it's moving towards more a system where it's no longer as orthodox, religious, and autocratic as it once used to be. And that's actually a good thing because we are returning really to a state that the country has not seen since the 70s. Last time that we saw a reformer king or reformer ruler was with King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who actually introduced education for women and was actually secularizing the country before his assassination and that. So we are moving towards that kind of 1970s attitude with, of course, the modern touch to it. We'll see how this works in the long term if MBS does become a king eventually, because we first have to wait for King Abdullah to pass away before, not King Abdullah, but, you know, the king now to pass away before MBS can take over. And MBS is a very young ruler. So this is interesting to see what will come out of this country. But yeah, that's what I'll say on that.
Well, for sure. I just kind of want to close off on that by kind of saying, as you mentioned, right? We should still take a step back and just say, of course, for the record, that MBS has done some very brutal things, some very atrocious things, but of course, so have the governments of Russia and Iran. At least Saudi Arabia, yes, they're an autocracy, but I know that there's this sort of meme, this perception of the Saudi royals that is kind of common in some of the more radical sort of communities online and whatnot, that kind of sees them as basically supporting Al Qaeda and being, the most fundamentalist Islamic forces in the world. It should be noted that the Wahhabi clerics, the most fundamentalist clerics in the country, are not very happy with the House of Saud. They see the House of Saud as basically an American Western decadent puppet. I mean, they got so outraged when the Saudi government spent several dozen $billion building a large hotel complex and shopping center complex around the Grand Mosque in Mecca, for example, right? They kind of see them as westernizing the country, and so when we in the West look at them and say, oh well, they're just, they're super backwards or whatever, that they're just as bad as Al Qaeda or whatnot, it misses the nuance and the context of that environment, that in that political Overton window, MBS is on the more liberal side of things. Of course, it's a very far conservative spectrum as it is, but he's less conservative than the ultra orthodox clerics that see him as a decadent Westerner, basically. So
Yeah, I mean, I would say on to that point though, for people who try to make that connection, I mean, there's people within Saudi Arabia, the country, that have personally financed terrorism though. But you can say that with a lot of countries though, like
mhm,
the Saudi state itself. Like for one, like Al Qaeda doesn't believe in a kingdom, like they don't believe in monarchy, so that's already
yeah,
one thing that they don't believe in. They have very different objectives and goals. Like for example, like in Yemen, they don't they don't even support the pro Hadi government or whatever, that the republic or whatever in Yemen. Like they're against that and stuff like that. So like there's a lot of different areas, like internally and geopolitically, that Al Qaeda and ISIS are actually against Saudi Arabia. Again, you could find individuals, but the Saudi state itself does not have the same foreign policy. And I think it's kind of a meme that people say that.
I would actually say that Saudi Arabia's foreign policy 2014 onwards is different to its foreign policy, say, for instance, in the 90s, the early 90s. And this is what we have to recognize, is that since 2014, really, we have now a different, in terms of foreign policy-wise and also somewhat in state-wise, Saudi Arabia to the one of the 1990s, when you still had that rule of the ulama and the religious cleric, really, that they had to appeal to during the 80s and onwards. Now we have a state that is more focused now on protecting its interests and its survival, really, in the modern world. Because even the prior king acknowledged that technology and the internet and advances in technology and the social sphere of the world has changed the way things must be done. And there's no practical benefit, for example, for the country to remain in the 90s and that mentality, okay, will not change. Like, how the Iran does with the Ayatollah regime. It doesn't want to do that. It actually wants to change for its own survival. And that's a very wise decision that the government has done, even though the government is a long way from perfect, as we've already explored. But it's an approach that they've done for their own survival. That's very different to the Ayatollah regime. The Ayatollah regime is going full, crackdown on opposition and full zealousness towards this ideology. It's going down with the ship, in other words, whereas Saudi Arabia is saying, okay, we don't want to go down with the ship, we're going to actually try to repair the holes in the ship before we sink.
I think that's really interesting, actually, because it sounds like what you're describing is, because we talk a lot about doing regime changes, changing the regime of a nation in order to make it better, serve our values or our interests. But it sounds like what you're saying with Saudi Arabia is it's almost a whole nother way, where another possibility, which is where you get the regime in power just to simply change itself rather than doing
And that's a good
difficult way.
That's a good, very good thing that you've actually brought up, because that's what America's doing. American businesses and even the American government, even under somewhat the Obama administration, even to some extent on the Trump administration, they've told the Saudi Arabian government, they say, okay, you have this vision, and quite frankly, you still are very, appalling towards human rights. You need to change that, Busters, or else you're not going to get good business anymore. So
that
they've
seems
actually
like a really good way of doing it too. Much easier way, less bloodshed. Won't work everywhere, obviously. Saudi Arabia is a special case, but
yeah, true. Yeah.
That's the thing with the Hawks is like we, in the Hawk community would wish that every country could be like that, but unfortunately, Saudi Arabia is cooperative with United States and Western interests and objectives, and they're economically integrated, and the West has leverage and can apply pressure on them. Whereas with Iran, communist China, fascist Russia, they're not interested in having that sort of mutual relationship that would involve a pressure. They're interested in screwing us over basically at any opportunity that they get. You can see that with Iran, where they shot down a drone, they attacked the Abqaiq oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. Again, they would have done much worse if Saudi Arabia didn't have an alliance like the United States to offer some protection. And we saw with Russia, they invaded Eastern Europe and took the Crimean Peninsula. And then we saw with China communist China over the last 30 years, they've screwed us over in the World Trade Organization, and they only suboptimize. They don't care about a two-way street. They just want everything to be one way, lopsided for them. And with Saudi Arabia, there's real compromise there.
Yeah,
I think it's an actual alliance there.
I think that's a really interesting point and idea that I hadn't really thought too much before, but it is, obviously a lot of people talk about the contrast between our humanitarian and cultural beliefs with Saudi Arabia, but our alliance is built more on geopolitical interests. But because of that, it does give us this leverage to where, in us being the stronger partner in that situation, that we can pull them more on those more humanitarian issues. And so maybe even when you're looking at nations like that don't share our values, just our geopolitical interests, even then you can still sort of down the line sometimes win by pulling them just through almost like a gravitational force, pulling them more in our direction, because we're going to have more influence just naturally.
And then this is also, just to make one last thing before Anthony speaks, this is also very important why Saudi Arabia needs to maintain its alliance with the United States. Now, I've made, as I mentioned before, I've made a piece against, abuses of human rights, its government, and so on. But the fact of the matter is the best way that Saudi Arabia is going to change is if it maintains that alliance with the United States and it does not drift away.
Yeah. Right. No, that kind of goes back to the whole sort of like Jean Kirkpatrick type way of thinking, that you work with dictatorships that are brutal because you understand that your enemy also has brutal dictatorships, but that when you win, you're able to apply pressure because of the virtue of you being a democracy. Whereas if Russia wins, their allies won't become democratic because Russia themselves aren't democratic. And so the idea is, and you can see that replicated in countries like Chile, for example, where during the Cold War, they were led in tyrannical ways that were aligned with the United States, but that after the incentive to keeping them around was over, you had the pressure to reform was incumbent upon these countries. And I think with Saudi Arabia, it's such a long run conflict between the West and Iran and Russia in terms of the oil war, as well as in terms of the geopolitical and cultural battle, that even as that alliance is going on, you see reform happening in the country. Whereas with Chile, the reform only happened after the Soviets had fallen, and the pressure was there to get Pinochet out of power. But
yeah, part of the thing is that it's like when we left the TPP in 2017, that was Trump's first like big international thing was leaving the TPP. And then one of the biggest things I've always argued that it's like, like, well, maybe it screws over American work. Like there's that whole thing. But the thing is, when it comes to the TPP, we had leverage over Vietnam when it came to human rights abuses to a degree. And you could be like, well, how were we able to do that? Well, if going into the TPP, you can actually bring those countries into international courts or whatever. So like if there's like a company doing like bad business practices, and then this is like when it comes to like employees and whatnot, it's not necessarily the state itself, but it's about those companies that operate within Vietnam. So you were able at least to go into there and be like, hey guys, you should be less oppressive or whatever. And it's like we had that leverage, with Vietnam, and it's like, well, now we don't because Donald Trump thought it would be cool to leave it, and now China's taken the vacuum. But it's like if we're in international trade agreements, even if it comes to things like with businesses and stuff like that, it's like we could still have better output as far as as far as our influence goes, because we are the main buyer and producer. I'm sorry, like the main buyer of these products that come from either China or like Vietnam or Cambodia. But now we don't have leverage anymore. I mean, we could sign like a new free trade agreement or maybe re-enter it, but it's like if we don't have that influence, how are we supposed to change the country if you don't even get a shot to change it?
And that's such an excellent point. That's the problem, is that Trump's gone about this sort of unilateral approach in such a wrong way. Like I'm not somebody who's against unilateralism, because if you're the only person in a room that's saying the truth and nobody else will agree that you're saying the truth, then in my view, it makes sense to be unilateral. But Trump is being unilateral while speaking falsehoods, and he's going about doing these things in a counterproductive way. And it really brings back the point that elections have consequences. And imagine if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, just how strong Vietnam, Cambodia, all these countries would be united against communist China, and how integrated the economies of these countries would become, with the United States being the player with the upper hand to actually, in many ways, at a minimum, pressure substantial reforms over time on these countries, right? It's such a missed opportunity. And people will say how, oh, well, the TPP, that's an evil corporatist sort of thing or whatever. And it's like, well, corporations exist whether you like it or not. At least let's have pressure applied to make the world a better place. So.
Right. I mean, and I know some people, like, there's like some studies out there that even said like under the TPP, like, in Vietnam, like workers had at least a little bit more rights in there. Like there was some influence coming from there. And if you can change the people that work there, then you can change and then it trickles down to, changing the culture a little bit though. So I think a lot of people, like, they have to like read into these like international agreements because a lot of people see them as just buzzwords, and it's like, if it doesn't help you, think about it trying to help other people. Like that's something I always say. That's like, yes, you as a person may not be helped, but there could be other people around the globe. We have to think about these things differently.
And that's the problem, is that Trump's base of support doesn't care. They're America firsters, not in the sense of giving America the upper edge and hegemony over the world, and forging the world order in her image. They're not those kinds of people. They're the America firsters in the same sense as the original people that called themselves America First were. They were the isolationists in the 1930s and 40s who put up the banners like Pete the Pigeon and said, why not peace with Hitler? And Hitler is our friend. And it's unfortunate. Now they're not defending Hitler necessarily, but they're the type of people that they would shoot themselves in the foot to own the libs rather than work with the libs to make the world a more secure and prosperous place. So,
right.
But we'll go to Henry. We haven't heard too much from Henry. Do you have any sort of thoughts to add on this one, Henry?
About what specifically?
Oh, just about like the TPP and everything, and like in terms of.
You mean as opposed to the UMCA?
Yeah, and in particular in Asia, because Trump basically doing away with the framework for the TPP meant that the U.S. doesn't have the same relationship with Vietnam and other countries in Southeast Asia that could have emerged if, say, Hillary Clinton had won, right?
Oh yeah, no, I really don't have a lot of thoughts about that, honestly.
Okay.
Well, sort of my perspective on it is that the Malcolm Turnbull government, especially here in Australia prior to 2018, and when of course when Donald Trump came around, they were for the TPP because it was going to help bilateral relations with a lot of countries in Asia have a sort of a united front against organizations such as in the CCP in China. But unfortunately, because he's taken away, sort of he he got rid of that agreement. A lot of the nations now don't feel that the United States is doing enough to, especially combat China now. As we know, that they are doing, of course, naval patrols and other things like that. But for Australia specifically, Australia, for example, relies quite heavily, as well as a lot of Asian nations that are aligned with the United States, rely quite heavily on American support. Like we outsource a lot of our military to the United States. That's what Australia does. Like that's why we can spend, for example, on healthcare and other things like that, is that we outsource our naval kind of defense to the United States. We make sure that our alliance is strong with the United States, so we don't have to invest as much into our military, for example. But
Right.
that's just sort of like one of the ideas for such agreements as well, is that when nations don't have those ability to manipulate, not manipulate, I would say, but how can I say, nudge towards a particular direction, it's certain allies, then that becomes a bit harder to do. It's all a part of this. This is what people forget, is that the economic approach taken by countries is also in conjunction with their state policy or with their state vision. So it's all combined in a big multi-pronged approach that states take towards their foreign affairs, towards their geopolitical relations. So it's not like the economy is one big separate thing from these things. It's all interconnected with one another, and how the state intends to go about its vision, for example.
Right. And the other thing I would say is, one thing I've been reading lately is the fact that, like, for earlier I mentioned the TPP. This could have been, if we were in there for long enough, this could have developed further into another agreement that could have been like more like a security apparatus. Think about that. Like a lot of these countries aren't necessarily our allies, but we could have maybe had like a broad coalition of regional partners that would be interested at least in baseline security against China. But because we don't even have the economic side of it, well, why would they ever join a security organization with us? So it's one of those things where it's like we can build upon that, and we can make things better. And now, I know from the other day, from the off the coast of I think it was this just off of Vietnam, there was a couple of ships that were held up by the PLA Navy.
Yeah.
And it's like, imagine if we had some kind of organization or some kind of treaty between these countries, but we don't, so we can't really do much. But
yeah.
And because we're not their partners, if China wants to fuck with Vietnam, if they want to sink their fishing boats, if they want to hold up cargo boats, or if they want to arrest Vietnamese small businesses or whatever that are on the waters, they can do it because no one's there to stop them.
No, you're right. You're right, because they're the big dog on the block in that area now. Whereas if there were some sort of, not necessarily collective defense in the same sense as the Article 5 provision in NATO, but if there was some sort of framework that guaranteed at least a response of some sort on the part of all the other actors, if that sort of thing happened, then I don't think that would have happened in the first place. I think that communist China seizes the weakness of these other partners there being essentially, on their own, right? Because look at how they're trying to undermine Philippine sovereignty, for example. Look at how they're trying to make inroads even as far as Australia in terms of having leverage over the economy. And meanwhile, the United States, you would think that the United States would care the most of that and about that. And it's so funny to me because the same people that would argue against us, that would say that the TPP is horrible, that it's neoliberal, that it's corporatist, or all of this. They're the same people that think that the United States wants to be the world police and that the US wants to take over the world or whatever. If the US cared about the world, if the Trump administration actually cared about American standing in the world, they would be very upset at how much positioning in Asia and Southeast Asia and Oceania Beijing has taken away from them. It's just it's a myth, this idea that the United States wants to be everywhere in the world. That's not true under Trump. So
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I just want to quickly mention before Anthony comes in, like we used to have in the old days, back in the 50s to 70s, we used to have SATO, the South, Asian Treaty Organization, where it sort of did the same purpose as NATO until it was disbanded in 1977. But even with that, that is something that I would like to return to, really, when it comes to just multilateral alliances, especially in that part of the world and Asia, because you already have the United States Indo-Pacific Command that operates in the southeast of Asia, along with the Australian military and other militaries in Asia as well. But the problem is that Trump, especially the Trump administration, it wants to present itself as tough against these autocratic regimes, but then in the same breath, it cheers on these autocratic regimes and what they do, and empowers them by not addressing their fundamental exploitation of what the Trump administration is doing when it comes to Asia, Central Asia, and even the Southeast Asia. Is that Trump admires these autocrats. He admires them as if he's like, okay, I want to be as tough as this guy, when in reality he has little to no understanding on how geopolitics or how foreign policy or even the history of US hegemony across the world works and has operated. And that's a big problem. And leaders need to have that kind of base knowledge. Yeah, that's my spiel on the matter.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, I think one thing that's kind of dumb, is that it's like we enforce these weird rules still that, like, for example, Japan cannot have an aircraft carrier. Like, we still like hold them to that, but it's like at this point, it's like, can things like that change a little bit? It's like, shouldn't we now try to encourage our regional partners to build up their own defenses? You know, so that's also like another aspect, especially because I know this, because I watched on Foreign Council Relations as far as like Japan's military buildup is.
yeah.
There's actually a lot of limitations because of the United States still that are laws that we had in place from 1945, and I'm thinking that like,
Yeah.
well, maybe some of these things could be changed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like we allow them to have a defense force because we didn't want them to rebuild a massive military, which I don't know. I am fine with them being able to defend themselves and stuff, but yeah, I'm not sure. Like, do we want them to build up another massive military? I know they're allies and stuff now. I don't really know either way on that, but it seems like what you're saying is something the Trump administration might be sympathetic toward, because they do talk a lot about other nations defending themselves and like contributing more to their own defense. Because we have, for the last at least more than a couple decades, several decades, it took on the defense for many other nations around the world,
Right.
and Japan and a lot of Europe. And that's a big complaint they have. But I think it also benefits us to be not to like that they shouldn't have any share of their own defense or whatever, but in order to like keep other nations from building up these huge kind of militaries to where they can do aggressive wars or things like that.
Yeah,
Right.
I kind of sympathize with Henry on that, because I personally view the world as being at its most prosperous and secure and peaceful when there's a polar hegemon, like how the United States was right after the Soviets collapsed, for example. And I think if you had Japan or some of these other countries be allowed to build up to the same sort of relative military capacities as, say, 1941, 1945, or I should say, like, 1938 or something, then you're setting up a multipolar world, and multipolarity inevitably does lead to conflict, and it raises an interesting question that say if Japan or say the Philippines, just a random country, if they had say equal military power as the United States, would that affect the direction of the alliance? I think it would. I
Yeah,
think it should be centered
I
on
think I would
America.
agree. It's to a lesser extent than
Can I-
that. I don't think they'd
Right.
be on that, on parity with the United
Right.
States ever. But
Ca-
just to be on a certain level, like having the ability to conduct a certain war is like the inherent threat is there if they have the ability to do it.
Well, can I just sort of add to that? But we've got to also remember we can't really. Yes, I understand where Kevin and Henry are coming from, but on the same token, for example, Japan, for example, aligns more ideologically now with the United States and with a lot of Western states as well. And let's be honest, a multipolar world. I understand the criticisms of you don't want to have multiple supreme powers will each inevitably compete with one another. But I would have to say that if they have the same ideology, if they align, for example, they have the same institutions, the same world vision, like if they are, for example, for the liberal world order, I don't think a multipolar world would be actually that bad, to be totally honest, especially if they align, if you will, with the ideologies, for example, in the United States, or with just the liberal world order. Because for example, I guess maybe this is where I differ to a lot of you other neoconservatives and other hawks as well, is that for example, since I'm a liberal internationalist, my view is not to really make, I guess, the United States the main hegemon per se. The only reason why, for example, I support them in developing a stronger role is because the United States is almost the representative for the liberal world order. However, I believe, for example, in multilateralism, in having a world where you have an alliance that has a similar ideology. And if for example, we allow, which Japan's already doing under Shinzo Abe, they already are building up their military and they are building up their state, but they're doing so because the United States is not really doing much to help them against North Korea at the moment, as they should. But they're also doing so to make sure that it's not just, to go gain world power gains, just to make their sense of nationhood, their sense of purpose, and to help in the security of the world, because that's what the United States has sort of helped lead them in the direction of towards. And I think that's not really too much of a bad thing. I do understand the criticism, of course, to the multipolar world, of course, as you mentioned, with conflict, but I also say that we mustn't be too quick to knock it down, especially if all these states that are building up, besides China and the autocracies, are aligning with the liberal world order.
Well,
Right,
I think I largely agree with that. It's just that, I mean, like I was saying with Kevin, is that I don't think that they could ever have anything on parity with the United States as far as power and like scale or whatever. But if they were to like maximize their military capacity, I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of that, just because just the mere ability, like we don't have total control over them, and we know that mentalities and populations, especially nowadays, it can change a whole nation, their mentality, their foreign policy, it can change quickly. And I'm not saying that's the case with Japan, or I'm not even saying it's likely. It could be a small percent chance, but the ability for them to conduct or to be a threat is a threat. Like just the ability to like engage in a war, like to where they're a war of aggression somewhere. Like, I mean, you could say the same for the United States, but I feel like it's different for us. I don't know. And I do understand what you're saying, and I take that point on, that I do want them. I'm not saying that they shouldn't build up more than they are now, or take more of a role in promoting the values that, like you said, they do share our values right now. I 100% agree with that.
Well, the other thing too is like the Japanese self-defense forces. They're only defense forces. They're only legally able to defend the country. During the Iraq War, they sent over medical personnel to help our troops. Same with Poland and other countries. So even building up medical staff within the military also helps us too, because it's like we didn't want to keep surging more troops there. So other international bodies came in. They came in to help our troops with medical staff.
Right.
And that stuff helps. And it's like, yeah, no one's saying that Japan should be like a nuclear power. I mean, they could get nukes if they really wanted to. but it's like they can't have at least an aircraft carrier or so in order to defend
Well,
themselves. It's only defensive though against China. And the thing is, they have like reactivated their Marines, but it's only specifically to defend against their islands because the US is doing nothing with
yeah,
the island buildup. And a lot of that island buildup is gone under Trump, and Trump has done nothing about it. So if
yeah,
I'm like the Philippines or if I'm like Taiwan, I'm building up the military. Like, I don't care. I don't care what the US thinks. They're not doing
yeah.
anything. Trump is not responsive. I'm sorry. Like, you have to do something at some point. You can't
No,
fall like Poland in 1939.
There are a couple arguments in Anthony's favor, Anthony Avista-Buisson, as well as Roberto here, because you guys are making similar points on this. When Anthony Avista-Buisson, when you mentioned the ideological component, that's a really good argument because you could look at countries like France and the United Kingdom. They have pretty strong militaries, and especially in France's case, they have a lot of nukes, relatively speaking. Yet they are technically a threat to the United States. Like if they decided that they were out to get America, they would immediately be a big threat. But they're a potential threat, I guess technically would be the term. But they're a strong ally right now. And so in that sense, the problem is I also agree with what Henry was saying, which is that sentiments can change kind of quickly, and allies that you empowered previously can turn on you in time. I understand that too. However, I think the best argument here on your side of this would be that the United States, by the White House's own volition, had forfeited that position, because it's a two-way street if you are going to be a hegemon, because it's not just I tell everybody what to do and therefore I win. It's like if you're a hegemon, you're taking on responsibility. You get to expand your interests and make the world in your vision, but you also have to protect your allies and be there for them. If you're going to tell them, no, you can't build up a big military because then you would be a threat to me and I want to have the upper hand here. The other side of that street is, well, when they're in trouble and they're under threat, you now have to come and have their back, right? And Trump hasn't done that. So that's a good point.
Well, the other thing too is that, in a sense, to outsource your own security in a way, like I understand the problems with it, but the benefit of it is that it's like they're able to defend themselves, right? Like for example, like Poland, like let's say like we had to like let's say there was a huge rise in ISIS in like some African state, like so they just hypothetically, let's say we had to send hundreds of thousands of soldiers there. Well, I want Poland to be able to defend itself for at least a fucking week. It's got to at least defend itself for a little while because we can't have soldiers everywhere at all times, right?
Right.
Like you have to be able to defend yourself. It's the same thing.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to interrupt. Actually, no. You finish your point, Anthony, Roberta, and then I just want to add something after you.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to like security purposes, it's like we have to have our soldiers only in the most like potent flashpoint areas in the world, like France, Britain, Israel, like all these countries, Canada, they should be able to defend themselves to a degree. Like they shouldn't be knocked over by Putin with like the dominoes or something like that. They got to be able to stand for themselves. And it's like, yeah, no one's saying they got to be a nuclear country, but like for example, like South Korea. South Korea has a huge ass military, and they need it to be able to defend themselves and be able to have more leverage on the world stage a little bit, at least compared to the regional powers. It's like for example, like with Ukraine had pretty much a joke of a military. Russia was able to conquer that. That's what I'm saying. So I think collective security is a issue that we need to.
Okay, so what I want to sort of add to that is that the U.S. military's approach, especially when it comes to its partners, is that it's changed its approach really from, if you just like take an example, like during the Iraq War, where it used offensive, more leading from the front, where it used over 100,000 ground forces to overthrow the regime and then to nation build afterwards. They've changed their approach from leading from the front to now the Obama administration's approach from leading from behind with the by, with, and through their local indigenous forces, because the aim is that you take a small residual force and you empower the indigenous forces of an area and you strengthen those indigenous forces so that you don't need the presence, the long-term US presence there, because those indigenous forces, since they're indigenous to the area, they can have an indefinite presence over there because they're empowered, they have their own military capacity. But that's just an example where nations actually should be, that's one example that actually I like about the approach, is that you're empowering those indigenous local forces. And you can sort of apply this to a geopolitical lens as well. Is when the United States is there as a supporting role. This is why, this is actually an argument I would actually pose to a lot of isolationists as well. You don't have to necessarily have huge numbers of the US personnel in one single country. You can have a minimum numbers of US personnel in other countries so you can assist and support and really strengthen the local forces of an area without having to put too much resources or too much manpower into any one particular area and stretch yourself thin.
Well, right. I mean,
I would agree with that, and I think that's kind of what we see in a lot of places where you're talking about us supporting them. Like you were talking about Japan, and we have a base there. We have a Marine base. We have a lot of ships around that region, and you're saying they need an aircraft carrier. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but we have aircraft carrier groups around that region all the time, and also the aircraft carriers, from what I've heard, are the next 10 or 20 years, it's becoming more obsolete. It's not as worth, according to the budget, how much money you spend building one, it's not necessarily worth it. It's more of an offensive thing too. And it's I'm not opposed to Japan having the aircraft carrier, obviously. I want them to be able to defend themselves maximally, but being able to do, I don't know, to wage a massive foreign conflict, Japan, if they were capable single-handedly of something I don't know, taking down Vietnam or something like that, or you know what I mean? I don't see that. It's not the same thing. You're talking about them having enough capacity to defend themselves for a week. I think they do, but also particularly because we have the capacity and we're already in these regions there to back them up. I don't think Russia could steamroll Japan or South Korea in a week. I don't really know. I haven't obviously analyzed this, but I think that they're better off than that. It's not like Russia going into Afghanistan again or something like that.
We say that, but Crimea fell within a very short span of time, though.
Well, yeah, it's a very different thing.
I know, according to I know a couple of friends, on Twitter that were telling me that the Baltic states, like Lithuania, Belarus, all those countries would fall within 48 hours of Russia. Russia, I mean, if Russia had the ability to do that, they could fall within a very small span of time.
It's a different thing than Japan or Canada, right?
Well, can I just quickly address Anthony Roberto? You've also got to remember, Anthony, that there was also a quasi whole. There was a whole. What was it? I think it was a reformation or a. I think it was a. I can't remember what the actual name for it is, but they passed they've had a vote essentially in Crimea for whether or not it should become a part of Russia. And Russia exploited that vote essentially and used it as a pretext to allow its special forces to get into the country, and then it trained local militias there as well that are to fight a war there that is still going in the war in Donbass afterwards as well.
And also, just as a quick point, there were a lot of ethnic Russians in Crimea, right? So I mean.
Well, right, but okay, but it was a lot of it that had to be a lot of it foiled to an extent, though. I don't really believe a lot of the surveys that come out of Russia, though. I'm very skeptical about how that really came about. Wow. They flat but I'm purely talking about the military side of it, though. They literally annexed Crimea. That's Hitler annexing the Rhineland. Militarily, they actually took that within a very short span of time. It's when Georgia, the little northern part fell, that fell militarily very, very quickly.
Yeah, if you're talking about,
that was a week. That was actually 5 days.
if you're talking about boosting the military capacity of those nations, that would be a different discussion
Well,
than Japan or Canada or something like that.
can I just say really is that we got to also miss the fact that Russia. We have to remember that Russia's not really that a powerful country in terms of its military. I mean, a lot of the time it outsources its military to private military contractors and to special forces. Like, for example, only in Syria, it has very special forces and military police, but most of the forces there as well are private military contractors from Wagner and other organizations as well. Because what essentially Russia does is it pays these external organizations because the fact of Russia being a kleptocracy and it have essentially an intelligentsia running the show, it funds money to different organizations out of the pockets from personal billionaires that live in Russia at the behest of the Russian government. So a lot of the time, its military, it likes to boast, oh, it has a powerful, strong military, but you've got to be in reality that it's more clever on the political front than it is, for example, on the military front. That's its goals are, is it outmaneuvers, for example, in the Middle East, if you want to say it outmaneuvers to a lesser extent, to quite an extent, the United States, especially in areas like in Syria and in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq. It outmaneuvers the United States through the political channels that it has and through those means, rather than purely just, okay, it's going to come in basically with a huge military. I mean, with Crimea, I understand your point, Anthony, with it like falling within a couple of days, but we also have to remember that a large factor of that is that it had local forces as well that were helping it as well. And it was not the whole case where it's just like a full-blown, okay, let's send hundreds of thousands of troops into Crimea, boom, it's ours now. It was not that kind of situation like with Hitler, for example, in other areas like in Poland or something like that. So I would say that I understand your point when it comes to that, Anthony, but I don't think it was to that extent that you're making it, to be totally honest.
Well, I think Kevin brought this up before, that one reason why Russia doesn't have the same military projection is because of their failed economy. Like, if Russia had the economy of like China or something like that, they would be able to project more military power. You know, like one reason why in Syria that they don't have as much as soldiers in there is because Putin wants to do it as cost effective as possible. Hence why Wagner forces are the big bulk.
Yeah.
I mean, Putin would love to have thousands of more troops there to be able to police stuff and whatnot, but he can't do it because he's a realist, you know, right? Like he's gonna have to outsource it. Like if he had
economy,
right, like if he had a better economy, he would be able to do it though, but he can't do it. So what he's got to do, he's got to send in the Russian Air Force to do some bombing runs. He's got like a couple thousand personnel, but most of the personnel there, of course, are Wagner because Wagner's cheaper. It's able to go through there. You know, it's not much as political. There's more political expedience to it. You know, like when you have contractors, it's much easier. Like there's less protesting behind it. So like there's a lot of benefits to that though. But like if Russia had like the size of economy as like China, they'd be like, oh shit, we can waste a few more bombs. We can waste a few more soldiers over there. You know, it's because they're able to project more power.
And that's the thing is that the economy of fascist Russia it's on the same rough scale as the economy of the state of Illinois, you know, depending on how you measure it, of course. It varies between Illinois or New York State, depending on how you measure it. But the thing is, that's tiny. That means that the United States still has another 49 states to produce GDP to outcompete. Like they are very small. They're more similar in terms of countries. They're roughly around the same economy as Canada, but they have about 4 times the people and almost twice the area. So Canada is much richer per capita than Russia is. But of course, Russia has the political tact. They have the ability to do these sorts of, as they say, like Maskarovkas or whatever, where they'll go in and they'll deny, and then eventually after the status quo is solidified in their favor, then Putin will come out and say, oh, those little green men I denied, oh, those were actually ours, you know. And it's like, oh, who could have seen that coming? Like, you know, that's the thing is, as far as to get back to the earlier point about the ethnic composition of Crimea, most of eastern Ukraine ethnically aligns more with Russian, but you also have to keep in mind that in those areas, going back to, you know, the Party of Regions under Viktor Yanukovych and his thugs and everything, they really saturated the media where it was either pro Yanukovych propaganda or people would be able to watch Russian state TV. And people don't really have very much access to the internet in high numbers over there. And people watch old school traditional media, which is basically like, it's like the Russian version of what a lot of people would kind of make Fox News out to be in the West, except it's a much more extreme version of that. You're getting one perspective and you're getting that ad nauseum, and it's pro Stalin, it's pro Putin, and it's pro Tsar Nicholas II. That's what they get, and of course it's pro Viktor Yanukovych. It's a smorgasbord of totalitarian ideology that they get spoon fed, and
Right.
you know
Well, the other thing I would say when it comes
for
to military
decades.
projection is like, for example, like there's like a disputed dam on the Nile River between Sudan and Egypt. Both of them have pretty large militaries. So, because of that, they're more likely to take it to the international table. If
Yeah,
one
that's
country
true.
is lower than the other, then they can just invade it. I mean, of course, it's not as simple as that. It's a bit reductionist. But at the same time, if there's two countries that have similar military projection, they're more likely to take it to the international, like, you know, whatever bodies there are. I mean, in this case, they took it to the U.S. to see, and we're trying to figure out those negotiations. But to an extent, having a defensive military also helps you when it comes to the political leverage, as far as trying to get what you want. It's like
Yeah.
when Russia invaded Crimea, countries like Bulgaria, Poland, they had to at least build up their military defense. I think at least raise it by 2% to at least cover for some extent, just
Yeah.
in case if something ever happened,
Yeah, sure.
whether it be
But
direct or indirect.
wouldn't that go? What you were saying about this conflict? I don't know anything about it, but you're talking about over this dam on the Nile between Sudan and Egypt, and
Well, it's not like an
if they had,
actual like
if they had,
shooting conflict.
well, yeah,
It's
no,
a
no, no,
political
no.
conflict.
I get it, I get it. But what you're saying is there's this conflict, and if you're saying if each of them had these defensive militaries, they would have to take it to get it worked out through a mediator on the international level. But what you were advocating for, it seemed, was to increase militaries of other nations, because I don't know, maybe we were misunderstanding, but like we were saying, yeah, defensive is fine, but you were saying increase it more than that. So if you had one that had a larger military, it was increased to where it could project its power over the other one. They wouldn't have to do that. They could attack the other one and just simply defeat them. And
Well,
like, you see what I'm saying? Where if it's defensive, if they have defensive militaries, that works out fine, right? As long as they can defend themselves, good.
right.
As long as it's a stalemate. But if they build up enough to where they can project their power over their neighbor, which was the problem I think me and Kevin were having earlier, is we would like America to be able to do that, but not necessarily other nations defend themselves. Yes, of course. But project their power over their neighbors, not necessarily, if they're not the United States or one of our very close allies, like the British being able to do that, or someone else.
Well, we've pretty much gone to the point that it's actually underdefended. For example, like in Germany, like a lot of German helicopters and tornadoes and a lot of these other airplanes, they don't work very well because they underfunded the military. Like we're actually below in some countries being able to defend itself. Like logistically speaking, when it comes to the German military, it's been pretty awful as far as aviation goes. There's a lot of been breakdowns. There's a lot of problems with to get things out of the sky and whatnot. So in a lot of cases, like in some of these countries, they're not even able to defend themselves. So I think
they
asking
would
for a
be able
small
to
increase.
defend themselves for a short period, and we have a military base also in Germany, and a large defensive setup in Europe. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't increase their defenses. I'm all for that, but
the defenses don't even work to an extent. Like if you look at some of the aviation crashes and
what
whatnot.
exactly would their defenses be inadequate?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Some of these defense systems in some of these places are kind of inadequate to an extent, though, that they need an upgrade.
For what though? Inadequate in In the
Well,
case
to help
of,
us like in combat operations, such as like in like in Afghanistan and whatnot.
well, that's
Like
not
the
a
German
defensive
military.
operation. That's not defensive. You're saying it's inadequate for their defense, and I'm saying in the case of what? Like what threat?
Well, in
When
case of like NATO has to project power like or use our
that's
Article
not
5.
really
Like,
defensive though.
well, why is it not defensive? If they
Projecting
have,
their power in some other region on the planet, that's not defensive.
well, no, I mean like if they have to, like what we had when we had to go into Afghanistan.
Yeah, we would have been able to do that without Germany. I mean, it's
Well, I mean, we've built a pretty big
and also
international
that's not
coalition.
defensive.
Though.
You're saying they're incapable of defending themselves for a week or whatever.
Well,
So,
I mean, I don't know the actual numbers of how long they've been,
but
been
it
able
sounded
to
like you were
defend
saying on
themselves.
defensive, and like we were saying, build up their defenses. They should be able to defend themselves, and it
Well,
seems like
right.
your complaint seems to be that they can't assist us better in our projection of power around the world. Like when
Well,
we're
right.
going into
Well, they
Afghanistan,
lead from behind.
they don't contribute enough when we project our power in other regions.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. So, like, if we do need help in other places, like when we went into Iraq, we had other allies such as like Britain that was able to help us be able to obtain goals there. And I think
Britain's a little bit different. Like Henry kind of alluded to that there's that sort of special relationship there where the idea of Britain's population shifting so radically against the United States is so vanishingly small, but you couldn't necessarily say that about other countries. And the thing is, it's not to say that that's what's going to happen. It's not even to look with that much suspicion at countries. It's just to simply say that from my worldview personally, I think that the world is more stable and prosperous when there's one superpower that has hegemony. And for me, the superpower that I most agree with is the United States. And so it's got to be the United States. If there were multiple countries that had significant power, not necessarily even equal to the US, but similar to the US, the ability to project power in either direction, against the alliance or in the service of the alliance, I think that the world would be less stable and more volatile, even if they shared an ideology, for the simple fact that Henry's right, that things can change. And I believe that the configuration, that order itself, the ordering of the world order, if you will, between multipolar or unipolar, will determine cleavages arising. So you might agree on things today and have everything be fine against the common enemy, but once that enemy is gone, you might find other things that weren't a big issue before that now come to the fore. And now those become a point of cleavage that starts a flashpoint. And maybe that's just, me being a bit more paranoid, me having, Mearsheimer type sympathies or whatnot in that respect. But, we do have the war kettle here, and I'd like to welcome them to the studio. So thanks for coming on, Jay. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Thank you for having me once again, Kevin. I did try to get here for 7 a.m. start, but I'll be honest with you, Kevin. It's difficult to wake up in the morning.
No, I know.
I've got such a hard life, Kevin. Get up whenever the fuck you want, do fuck all day, smoke weed, and do fuck all night, and go to sleep. I mean, it's so hard, Kev. You know what I mean?
Man, let's see. Like for me, I often get up for 6 a.m. for work and stuff, and so I appreciate it. It's tough. I know it's really difficult to do so. So to do that, to be on a stream where it's not something that is actually your job, that takes commitment, man. So let's all give Jay here of the Word Kettle a big up, because it's early where you are. You are under lockdown on the island of Cyprus. So
I am. But yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm just waking up. I just got a nice big fat cup of coffee as well. It's a beautiful morning. We're going to start a lovely day. It's going to be awesome. What's the main topic for tonight? Oh, Saudi Arabia versus fascist Russia.
Well, we were talking about the oil war, the price war, that sort of thing for about the first 40 minutes. And then we got into talking more about economic warfare in general. And we got to talking about, just to give you a bit of an overview, Jay, and for those tuning in right now, we still have 20 people with us, but they might be a different group of people from those who started or a mixture thereof. Just to kind of recap the first hour or so of the program, we talked about how economic warfare, or at least economic pressure, can be used to cause more liberalization in countries that don't have much in common with us, but share geopolitical or economic interests, like Saudi Arabia, for example.
Yeah.
We talked about how Saudi Arabia, even though they're obviously very bad domestically, they've made incremental progress on things such as women's rights and whatnot. And
Yeah.
part of that was due to economic pressure from the West. Part of it was due to the internal campaign of MBS to enact his own vision, and part of that is a reform agenda and a diversification of the economy. Whereas fascist Russia, in contrast, has actually gone backwards. They've done things like they've passed, legislation saying, if a husband beats his wife, she's not allowed to call the police, for example. So they're becoming more like what Saudi Arabia was. And
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is moving more towards not the West, mind you, but at least a more liberal direction than they were before. And we talked about how there's this idea in the West that, the Saudi royals, they're just like Al Qaeda. Yet the radical clerics in their own country see the regime, they see the government as Western puppets, decadent liberals, that sort of thing. And so within the context of that system, there's a big difference between the Wahhabi clerics and the royals in Saudi Arabia, for example. And then we went on to talk about the TPP and how, if Hillary Clinton had been elected president of the United States, she would have pursued the TPP, and it would have created a collective sort of block against which we could have had a stronger buffer against communist China. And then Anthony Roberto raised the point that if that had happened, we could have conceived of in the near future having it go to a military level, which would have made the recent targeting of Vietnamese vessels by the Japanese Navy, or not the Japanese, the Chinese PLA.
I was going to say, Japan doesn't have that much power yet. Not yet.
That wouldn't have happened if there was a similar sort of, not even necessarily analogous to NATO, but some block of cooperation in which it would be clear that if you messed with Vietnamese vessels, you're messing with Philippines vessels, you're messing with Japanese vessels, you're messing with American vessels.
The thing is, too, is that it's like the PLA Navy, the plan, it's very aggressive, too. Like, if you ever see videos or like and stuff like that, like, they are extremely aggressive. Like, they treat a lot of these fishermen like shit. I mean, whether it be Vietnamese, Cambodian, or in your case, what you've said, the Philippines, like, these people are like real assholes. Like, so it is a bit of a problem, like, so, like that's what I was trying to point out,
Yeah. Oh,
also,
man.
if that had happened with the TTP, the South China Sea would have been more secure. The alliance of countries that were going to be involved in it would have been more united. And with that going on, America's position would have no choice but to be heavily involved in protecting the South China Sea from China.
Yeah, well, another thing to note, Jay, which you probably noticed, is that I've got premium StreamYard now. So I got background, I got Chiron, I got the themes and stuff.
It's sexy, mate.
It's a different look. It's a different look. This is just the beginning here, and I just wanted to give a thanks to Wyatt Claypool, who the newest patron of the channel. He pledged some financial support to the channel, and this is what happens when you do that. So big up to the patrons. So
yeah, I know what it's like, mate. My patrons have helped buy me new equipment, new laptop, paid for me to go flying, go to Israel and stuff. Big up to the Patreons that look after the Hawks. That's all I can say.
Yeah, and we in turn try to look after the patrons by fostering a discussion that can, in time, hopefully change the political culture to where leaders like Hillary Clinton's and Tony Blair's come to power instead of Donald Trump's,
Or Jeremy Corbyn's.
Or Jeremy Corbyn's. Yeah, that's right. It's not a left or right thing necessarily. It's more about, do you see the West as the good guys or the bad guys?
Exactly.
Well, the thing is with Corbyn's case, it looks like he's done politically. But the problem that I see is when Trump is done, his sons can run for president. and that's what kind of scares me right there, because they seem to be pretty popular.
No, I'm going to be honest. I don't see his kids having the support that Daddy Trump did.
Yeah.
I don't know. And to be honest with you, I think the Republican Party are. I think this is their last little experiment of letting an outsider come into the party with money and just take over.
I agree. I agree with that.
I don't believe that the Republicans actually like having Trump as their leader. Not talking about just general Republicans. I'm talking about the establishment Republican Party. Yeah.
Well, and people would say that the establishment well, that's a very sort of anti-democratic way of looking at things. But keep in mind that the GOP generally is a follow the leader kind of party, and they've seen how this leader can be so damaging to their own agenda. Because sure, he's managed to, in some ways, kind of stack the Supreme Court, right? Of course, he had the prerogative to do so. I mean, legally speaking. But any Republican leader would have done that. There's nothing special about Trump. All the good things for them that Trump's done, the tax cuts, that sort of stuff, the Supreme Court, Mitt Romney would have done that. There's no advantage.
I mean, that's exactly right, I think, which is why I'm not sure that it is this is going to be the end of Trump-type GOP people. Because, like you said, he did what, at least the big things that they're most concerned about, he did them. Like, he went in and he got the tax cuts, stacked the Supreme Court. He did that stuff. And like Jeb Bush would have done that for them.
Yeah.
But the difference between him and Jeb Bush is that he got a lot more people to vote for him. He got a lot more people to vote for him in places where Jeb probably wouldn't have been able to. And you can say what you will, but I think that if it's not necessarily that someone will take a more serious person, not a ridiculous buffoon, but someone that can more clearly articulate the types of things that Trump sort of stands for, but he watches people like Tucker Carlson and gets his ideas from that. But someone that is more serious, articulating the same ideas in a more coherent and smarter way, I think that they could carry that forward potentially. And I think you'll see that play out in the next contested Republican primary. There will be someone running the Trump lane. Like, that lane is obviously there. It has succeeded. Someone's going to do it, and they will be a contender. Like, maybe you'll have an old school establishment guy like a Bush or something, not like an actual Bush, but you know what I mean, an old establishment Republican running. But I think that lane is clearly going to be open for them in the next Republican primary.
I would say to that, Henry, I think Nikki Haley would be the best hybrid between them, because she has reached out to the populist Trump supporters, and she's reached out to the neocons as well.
That's true.
All those people, like, she's like a blend of everything. Like, she tiptoes the line of being able to be balanced of like, okay, I criticize Trump and I can praise Trump, so she can wield those.
I think what you're
together.
going to see is a more serious person, not like Nikki Haley necessarily, but someone that is very socially conservative, but also economically more liberal, more left-wing economically, and socially very conservative, almost like a light sort of Nazball type person. Very that's what Trump is ostensibly, except that he's not socially conservative in any real way. And no one can take him seriously if he tried to be. But I think you could see that, because there are many people that are economically in favor of left-wing ideas like socialized healthcare, or fighting for the working class, things like that. And but also at the same time, they're not in favor of like a lot of the progressive stuff, like the transgendered things and gay things turn them off. These are the people in Michigan and the working class people in Detroit. They're lower educated people that are poor, but they, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that message reaches those type of people. That's why they like Trump. He was like, in his marketing, a man of the people, but also not, he wasn't PC. He wasn't a pussy. Was kind of their whole thing with him.
Right.
And so,
So
I think
then-
there's a lane. I think there's a lane for that. Where
So then, my question would be like, where would the libertarians go? Because they are a relatively big faction within the Republican Party.
they'll
So
go where they always
would
went, which is
they?
nowhere.
Would they? Well, right. No, I mean, like, would they go? Would they vote Dem to
No.
despise? Well, to despise the GOP.
No, because they'll say that the Dems are a bunch of corporatist PC people. You know, I just want to say on that point, that's a really interesting point that Henry makes about how that lane's still going to be open to the Republican Party. I think that's probably true. I think that the so-called, you know, establishment or whatever, the RNC, all that sort of stuff, they're not going to want another Trump type figure just because it's volatile. They'd rather have somebody who's stable and will get their agenda through, you know, on the court and economics. But the Democratic Party, in contrast, though, has kind of had that kind of shift that we're kind of talking about here. I don't think in the next 4 years, say, for example, there's going to be a very prominent Bernie type equivalent or Trump type equivalent populist running. I mean, maybe there will be, but I don't think they're going to get anywhere near what Bernie got this time. And Bernie was barely able to muster a competition. I think the Democrats are going to kind of weed that out in time. And so I think it's possible for the Republicans to do the same. But I think the difference is that, and Henry's right, that there's a big part of the Republican base that doesn't see Trump as cringy the way that most of the Democratic base
Right.
I think there's a lot of things that are hard to calculate on it, like where we just don't know what's going to happen or how the future is going to play out. Like when you're talking about Bernie and his path not being viable, it depends a lot. It depends on what the next couple generations are going to think and do, how they're going to be taught, who's going to teach them. It also depends on the people that voted for Bernie. Are they going to continue with their beliefs, or are they going to change their mindsets as they grow older, like most people do? Because he won a huge portion of young people. So are they going to continue their hardcore Bernie or bust beliefs into their 40s? Like, I don't know. I mean, possibly, but probably not.
Right.
But also, are the younger people going to pick up on that, and who's going to be educating them? It's almost incalculable. But I think based on this, if you're talking the next 4 years, there will also be a lane, not to the nomination perhaps, but to be a successful competitor in the Democratic primary, using a Bernie type lane. I think that'll be there, obviously.
The thing is, I would say to that, Henry, is I think when in 4 years we don't know exactly how the political landscape will exactly be. I mean, between 2012 to 2016, there was a pretty big jump. I think you are right. There is that, I guess, that Naz Bully kind of lane still open for people, because the 2024 primaries for the Republican Party will be completely open. It will be a completely it'll be like the Wild West. So there really is a lane open for anyone, really, whether it be paleo-conservative, libertarian, neoconservative, center-right, someone who's a mix in between. So there's really a bunch of lanes open, and we don't know which lane is going to win the nomination. I think one thing that's interesting, I know I talked to someone I know from school about this, and he was telling me that, like, for the Democrats, they normally fall in line with the establishment more than the Republicans, because if you think about it, all the Democrats pretty much dropped out pretty early, but in 2016, the Republicans didn't drop out until much later. I mean, Ted Cruz didn't drop out until towards the very end, even though Donald Trump was pretty much the presumed nominee. So it seems like the Democrats, they're more better at falling back onto the establishment better.
There's a distinction to draw there. There's a distinction to draw there. When I said that the Republicans were more a party of follow the leader, the Republican base, once there's a candidate, they'll get behind that candidate vigorously and show up to the polls for them no matter who they are. But the Democratic candidates will rally around a leader pretty soon. The Republican candidates are fighters. They'll duke it out to the end. That's the difference.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to what Anthony was saying about Ted Cruz and Trump, I mean, you could imagine a kind of a hybrid candidate there, because Ted Cruz's big base was evangelical Christians. It was Texans,
Yeah.
mainly. And so you could imagine someone who was saying a lot on economics and things, as well as Trump could, which was barely at all. Someone that could articulate better what Trump was trying to say, the sort of thing Steve Bannon or Tucker Carlson says, but saying it better and more intelligently, but also being themselves very socially conservative, being an actual Christian, not, this like 2 Corinthians. I read a Bible verse once and fingered a bunch of pussies on my way there, or whatever
Jesus.
Trump's thing was. Like like you could have a much better candidate than Trump
Right.
ever was. Like you could design this candidate, and I'm not saying that would be successful. Maybe the establishment would win over, but I think you could, if you were smart in designing a campaign, you could find a candidate to fill that lane that would be very, very fucking effective.
Exactly. Well,
Given where things are going on both the left and the right, like I think that path is there. I don't know if it would be successful, but I think it could be done.
Right. I think too. One last point before if anyone else wants to talk, I would say to that, Henry, is when it comes to the establishment for the Republicans, I wish they got around someone who was more center right, like they rallied behind someone, because they kept splitting, and that's something I didn't really like from 2016. It's like, oh my god, guys, like you guys aren't going to stop Trump because they kept splitting everything. So it's like, well, now there's so much division, Trump can take it all, which kind of sucks.
Can I just sort of interject a bit over here? As I guess I'm not too well versed as I could be when it comes to the party dynamics, but from what I can see, especially when it comes to the Trump administration and its effect on the Republican Party, especially, is that when it comes to Trump and the rest of the Republican Party, Anthony, your microphone's on and it's making weird noises.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that, but anyway, when it comes to Trump and the rest of the Republicans, it's this kind of sycophantic sycophantic nature that you see from Mitch McConnell, especially, and other kind of Republicans, especially when it came to the whole Trump impeachment thing as well. I saw the sort of sycophantic nature of a lot of Republicans. Like for a long time, I thought that Lindsey Graham would be like kind of one of the remaining hawks after McCain, but he sort of has changed quite dramatically in his nature. He's become essentially a Trump sycophant, and I think that's a big issue, basically,
Lindsey
because
Romney's the last holdout. If McCain had lived, McCain probably would have voted to impeach, I would assume. Graham, if you'd asked me in 2016 and presented me with the facts of the impeachment, I would have thought Graham would vote to impeach, because he hated Donald Trump in 2016. He hated him in 2017, but then, like you said, he came around. He's one of his biggest defenders now. So he has, I wouldn't say he has no principles. Maybe he's thinking pragmatically, like, this is the power structure now. I get behind it. I do what I can with what I've got. Now, I view Graham as more that way. I wouldn't say he has no principles, but I would be, if someone said he had no principles, I would understand why.
Well, I think one.
I just want to highlight a point here by Dr. Zels in the chat. He says, and I quote, "Disaffected Republicans will vote Republican without fail 100% of the time. Disaffected Democrats will vote for Jill Stein because Hillary is just as bad." End quote. What do you guys make of that?
Hey, that's kind of true. And people that vote for Jill Stein because they say she's just as bad are fucking retards.
Yeah, I would say to
Jill
this.
Stein is Jill Stein is 10 times, a billion times worse. She's almost as worse as Trump in my book. Jill Stein.
I would say to this comment, I think this is actually a pretty interesting comment, because I think you've mentioned this yourself, Kevin, on some of your videos before, that like there's people like Ben Shapiro who are quote unquote disaffected Republicans, but it's always superficial things they don't like about Trump. Like at the end of the day, like they'll go to the voting booth and vote for Trump anyways. Now they'll criticize him and maybe they'll be more like, they'll scrutinize, but at the end of the day, they'll still vote. for Donald
Yeah.
Trump. So at the end of the day, the outcome is still the same. So they're just voicing verbally how they feel, which maybe changes a few things for maybe like local elections, but like on the national level, they will always still vote for for I guess the Republican nominee, of course. So like the question is like, what it really is a disaffected Republican? Like, what does that really even mean?
A Bill
Right?
Kristol type figure, somebody who's more of a neocon than Ben Shapiro. Now, of course, you could say that's a small amount of people for sure, but they tend to hold a lot more influence per capita than your typical Trump base voter, which, you could say that might be a matter of privilege by and large, and I can understand that argument, but it is something to be said. And this point was raised earlier, it might have been in the chat, that yeah, and I can't recall, it might have also been on our stream here, but the sort of the point that we were getting at was that in the Democratic side, the candidates will fall behind the establishment, if you will, candidate pretty early on, which gives that establishment figure that majority to overcome the Trump effect, because Trump did not win a majority of Republicans. He won a plurality, but they stay divided because their party is a party of fighters. And so if you're a disaffected Republican, if you're a Republican who has issues with the president or with your candidate, you'll voice them. And during the campaign, during the primaries, you'll make a big difference. Like, because if you're a Ted Cruz supporter and you don't like Trump, Ted Cruz could win theoretically, right? It was kind of close in some ways.
Right.
Whereas in the Democratic side, the Bernie type people don't really have a chance because the field tends to get consolidated more early on than the Republican side, because the Democrats as a candidacy, they tend to understand and act in the best interest of the party. Whereas with the Republicans, they don't have to worry about that so much because they know that no matter who's going to win, it's winner take all. And you can voice your criticism. I never really said that Ben Shapiro's criticism of Trump was superficial per se. I just said that it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of the votes, but it matters during the campaign. It matters during the primary. If everybody says that they're against Trump, that can have an effect. And so it makes sense. Like, it's not to say that there's no point in being critical of your leader or of the person that wins. That, of course, there's a point if you disagree with them, but it's not the same way on the Democratic side where they're going to go and vote for Jill Stein or something. But Ben Shapiro is not going to go and vote for the Libertarian Party because he cares about the conservative agenda, and he knows that he's got issues with Trump, but at the end of the day, the stuff that he wants done, the fundamentals like the Supreme Court, Trump will honor that, right? So
well, I think what's interesting is something I've had like talks with certain people who are into political science, is that one thing I've noticed is that it's like a lot of people in the Republican Party, it seems like they hate their own party more in certain aspects. Like if you think about it, like if you ask like a MAGA supporter what they thought of like Reagan or George Bush, they hate them. They absolutely hate them. They think they're horrible. And then 10 years from now,
they like the name Reagan. Trump has tried to like rebrand Reagan. Even Nick Fuentes has said that he would admit that Reagan was still a good president. They just don't really know anything about what Reagan really
He has the same slogan as Reagan, right?
Right.
America
Yeah. Make America great again.
Or make America great again, right? Make America great again.
And I think the other thing too is that, like you mentioned, like they consolidate power a lot more. And I think when it comes to Republicans, there's more factions. Where it's like when it comes to the voter base with Democrats, it seems like you have more like your old school Democrats, and then you have like your Bernie bros, but there isn't like large like political factions as much as there are in the GOP. Like I feel like the GOP is more splintered in that sense. Like I know like online, like on online spaces, you would say to yourself, "Oh my God, the left is completely like disillusioned." And yes, that's true. But if you look at the voter base, like throughout all the states, like there's more of a uniform kind of like vague belief where it's like with Republicans, there's so many different factions. Like you go from paleo conservative to more of your like your libertarian types. Like you just have like so many different types of factions and like national kind of conservatives where it's like I don't see that as much with the Democrats. Like the Democrats, it's like, oh my God, we're gonna vote for this person because the orange man is bad or something like that. Like they'll fall in line with something like that way faster.
Well, and the Republicans have a big division between like the Charlie Kirk brand of things, kind of how you alluded to with the libertarians, but specifically on economics. There's a big debate there between, are we going to be, Nazbully types like Nick Fuentes wants, where you do left wing economics with staunchly conservative social values? Or are you like a Ben Shapiro type where you do right wing economics with staunchly conservative social values? Or are you more of like, a Bill Kristol type where you do a little bit of a mix of both, maybe more center right, but you're socially moderate, that sort of thing? And then there are even socially liberal Republicans that are economically far right, So
They
it's
seem to
like,
get ostracized though. Like someone like for example, like they don't like John McCain because they thought he was like a libcock or some kind of like you know
well, he
something
had
like that.
Obamacare, right? Like Trump really didn't like that, for example, right? So
Right. So it's all like really interesting. So that's why I say, and I think Henry could be totally right though. Like maybe for 2024 he's completely right because the Republican lane is gonna be so open. So it really can go down either way. And that's something that I'm kind of afraid of, that someone worse than Trump can come into power. Because we see Trump as like someone who's kind of like inept, but there could be a very cold, calculated person that could come into power, or from the Democrats as well. But that's the thing, we don't know. We don't know.
Well, I think you made a good point back there earlier on, Anthony, about how I think, this is my own view, but I think that a Nikki Haley type figure would be tremendously potent because she wouldn't have all those op-eds in the New York Times saying how, she's hijacking the party the same way that the establishment wrote about Trump. And at the same time, the paleo conservatives and a lot of the MAGA guys, they would get behind her. Like she would be more of a uniter in her party and have an even stronger base, I think, than Donald
Right.
Trump. Maybe Trump's base would be more vocal, but she'd have an even bigger percentage of approval than Trump.
Well,
whereas Trump's like
mhm.
80%. Maybe Nikki Haley would be like 90%
Right.
of the Republicans.
Right. Well, I think the other thing too is that like when it comes to, I do believe like the first like Republican, like the first like president of the United States who's gonna be a woman, it's probably gonna come from the GOP side. Like I just have that feeling it's gonna come from the GOP side, and I think with Nikki Haley is that it's like she's able to unite around a lot of people. She's socially conservative, pretty conservative. And she's economically pretty libertarian, more libertarian than Donald Trump. So she can unite those factions. And libertarians, I've seen libertarians on podcasts the past couple of weeks. They've all said they would vote for Nikki Haley. So there you go. You've got that faction. You can get the Trump supporter. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like she has that aesthetic to it as well. So I think she would probably be. I think she has a pretty good chance. I think she has at least a 50% chance of winning the Republican nomination for 2024, assuming that she does run.
Right.
I think that very well could be the case, and I think your optimism might, could lead to that, of course.
Well, I think, of a lot of the candidates that are available, I think Nikki Haley, as far as the GOP field goes, is a pretty good pick because you're not going to get somebody that you agree with. Like if you're a Democrat, for example, if you're a hawkish Democrat, you're not going to get a Republican that agrees with Democratic stuff. Like, no, you're gonna get the best that you can get. And Nikki Haley would be an improvement over Trump. And I think that if she were in charge, sure, you'd have some people that are kind of like Nick Fuentes on a lot of stuff, but you'd also have a place for a John Bolton type figure in the State Department, for example. So,
Right, so he could get back his cabinet position again.
Well, if not him, then another hawkish kind of guy, or like a Mitt Romney type figure, something like that.
I hope she gets a hawkish cabinet. If she ever does become the nominee, she does need to get a hawkish cabinet. Like I don't want like any like Charlie Kirk types or any of these weird people. Like she needs to get some really serious people.
No, but it would be a mix of both. She has a coalition of paleos and neocons around her. So
so it'll be very interesting to see though. But hey, maybe John Bolton will be our national security advisor once again, right?
Once again, or Secretary of State. I mean,
Or Secretary of State too.
I
That's
mean, to be totally honest, probably John Bolton has some secret missions he's doing currently in Qatar and other places. So he could be like planning his own little coup d'état in the Republican Party. So watch. I'm just joking, but watch that space.
Well, no, we saw that tweet. We saw that tweet where he was walking like he was on a mission. You know, like he was walking almost as fast as the car was moving, and he's like, "Get out of my way! I got business to take care of. I just got back from sinking a Russian vessel off the coast of the Franz Josef Land in the Arctic. Like I'm on the move. You know, I don't have time to."
I'm going to personally overthrow the Ayatollah. Just me alone. I will personally overthrow the regime.
You know what you do is you airdrop Bolton just into Iran, and he'll sort things out.
Well,
There's
those old movies, Rambo, where like Rambo single-handedly takes down armies and stuff. You could have our generation's version of that, Bolton, or like Bolton 2, Unleashed. You know?
Yeah.
Right, he bolts people, right? I don't know.
Oh man. Oh man, I'll be back in a little bit. I just want to give the guests here and everybody kind of a heads up. I'm trying to avoid doing the super long streams now in favor of doing more frequent and consistent streams. So I'm usually aiming for 2 to 2.5 hours, generally speaking. So, but carry on. I'm just gonna get some water.
But as I said before, I mean, Operation Airdrop Bolton seems to be one effective potential move that the US can do when it comes to countering Iran. But it's just, because Bolton has that mustache, and, that mustache can hide a couple nuclear arsenals in it as well.
Yeah, I gotta say, though, that mustache, he keeps it pretty well, though. I mean, because, you'll see, other people who have, a mustache, it doesn't work very well. I know it doesn't work very well for me. So, that could be, his little aesthetic there. Someone said maybe Mitt Romney, too. I don't think she would pick Mitt Romney. I think he would be too old, though, by 2024.
Oh, no, he wouldn't be as old as Biden, right?
How old is Mitt Romney? Is he too old?
No, he would not be as old as Biden. I don't even have to look up how old he is. I've seen pictures of Mitt Romney.
He's just pretty damn old.
He still has hair that isn't white. I would say he's in his 60s, I assume.
He's 73. It says on his.
Holy shit! Okay, well.
Yeah.
I mean, even given that, 4 years from now, he'd be a year younger than Biden.
That is true. But would you want? But I don't know if you would want to still stay in politics though. I mean, I guess he could stay in politics at 77 though.
But I don't think Biden never expected to be here. Honestly, I honestly don't. I don't think anyone over a certain age, 75, wants to be in politics. But Biden kind of wound up here because,
hey guys,
2016
Obama
went the wrong way. 2016 went the wrong way, and
you wanted Yang. You wanted a young guy like Yang.
Oh
right?
yeah, hell yeah, yeah. I've said I'm very sick of all the old ass motherfuckers running for president. Yeah, I wanted Yang.
No,
I wanted Buttigieg. I would have preferred him.
Yeah, I mean, Buttigieg, honestly, like an openly gay man is not gonna win. That's the brutal fact of it. But and also, you could say he's too young and inexperienced, but I do think that's a factor more than any of that. But no, his policies were fine from what I saw. They were early on. He didn't have a lot of policies clearly laid out. It was more.
He just could never pick up the black vote, though. That's
because black people don't like gay people.
I know. I'm not. No. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, he could never pick up the black vote. It just kept falling down. It's dude, damn. Well, that's the thing with Joe Biden, though. I think that what makes Joe Biden very interesting is that he's able to get the black vote out almost as much as Obama.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I never thought the Obama association would carry over as much. Maybe it's not just that. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm assuming it's that, but it apparently carried over. And also, I think it's also that Hillary was a much less likable person. And there was also decades of Republican propaganda and smear
Yeah.
campaigns against her, and that we're not in the same way as Obama or Biden, I should say. Like with Hillary, they were saying she's this war criminal, she's evil, she wants to destroy the earth, she has all of these scandals. And with Biden, like the worst thing they say about him is like, oh, he couldn't finish his sentence. Oh my God, he's old. Oh, like he eats ice cream.
Do you know?
Dumb as shit.
Do you know? Do you know what I just want to say to that is that technically, Sanders is 1 year older than Biden. Biden is 77. Sanders is 78.
Yeah.
I was not hearing the whole dementia things for fucking Sanders of all people. It's so partisan, and that's what I mean. Such partisan attack.
Yeah,
and I don't take it seriously.
Biden does. Biden is a boomer. He does fuck up a lot of his statements and sentences, and I kick that off as to just natural being old. Maybe you could call it senile. I wouldn't call it dementia, which is like a condition. You
also got to remember that Biden was born with a stutter. Like he's had dealt with a stutter his whole entire life.
Said that. I thought that was more of an excuse to cope with it because he never brought that up before, and he didn't seem to have these problems before. But I also don't know how much, because I watch a lot of right-wing political content, so maybe I get a lot of stuff through their spin. I mean, I watch left-wing and right-wing, but I've seen the compilations of like the things he fucks up and stutters. But like in the debate with Sanders, he seemed perfectly fine to me. Like after watching the debate with Sanders, I was like, he could totally debate Trump. And, the other part of this is I would take a completely dementia-ridden, incompetent Biden over a totally lucid Donald Trump.
Hey guys, did you guys see that meme on Twitter where it shows like Hillary Clinton and like Trump? It's got like the graph of like the COVID cases and it's got like the Benghazi. Did you guys see that meme? I thought that was MAGA Twitter.
Yeah, I just want to quickly just say sorry. I don't know why on earth my thing just like dropped out for no reason. But Biden actually does have a stutter.
Hello?
And I remember him talking about
Oh.
What?
I don't hear no one.
Oh, you're good. I hear you.
I can hear you, Jay. We had some connection issue where it actually it disabled Anthony's connection, Anthony Avistubison's connection. I just added him back, but
that's strange. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
I can hear you now that you're back, but it did kick you out of the and now we lost Jay.
Oh,
I think we'll be back in a moment.
It's just freaking StreamYards, man. The premium didn't help. Damn.
No, it's because of the COVID. It's because of the pandemic. Everybody's online right now watching stuff. Like we still have like 25 viewers in here, and this is a small channel.
I think anyway, Anthony was saying about Biden's stutter, which I had heard that too, but I'd only heard it recently during this campaign, and to me it came off as a kind of a way to combat against the accusations of him fumbling his sentences. Yeah. I'm not getting old. I've always had a stutter or whatever.
Well, no. But I just wanted to say that he's actually is a serious condition that he's dealt with, and he actually does mention it in a town hall meeting. But I do understand that it does come off as kind of an excuse, and he could actually be potentially suffering from some form of like early onset dementia or something like that.
He had that stutter because obviously that's something you have to work cognitively to work around, and that maybe his old age could be bringing it back or like hurting him in some way, like with that. Because I've seen, like, I watched him when he's younger. He ran in 2008. He didn't seem to have these same problems. And also, like, a lot of the view I'm getting of it is from compilations and things from right-wing people. But also, I watch debates. I've watched the things he's put out. And it is there. I just chalked it up to he just seems like your average 78-year-old man that isn't, other than, Bernie doesn't seem to have the same problems exactly. But it's not really that concerning to me. Like, he fumbles over a couple words in a speech is not really a big deal to me, honestly.
Do you think it's the shape-shifting lizard people, Henry?
That is a possibility, Anthony. That's a good point you've raised right there.
Because it could be the Blackwater DNC, right? They could be rigging everything by the CIA, right, Kevin?
Yeah, it was a no good CIA rig. It was the CIA and the DNC and the Alphabet Boys.
Like, to me, it's one of those things where it's like, I wonder if some of these Bernie supporters, like, if they didn't like register the vote up until like Bernie Sanders like ran for president. It's like, oh shoot, I'm like 35, I've never voted before, so I'm gonna like go vote for Bernie. I feel like that's a lot of these people though. Like they never vote like for any other situation. So I don't know, like it's kind of funny. Oh, I did want to address this comment real quick with Nikki Haley. Oh no.
Oh,
Wait.
I'll go back. I will
Oh,
highlight
sorry.
it.
Because I did want to
I'll
address it real
highlight it.
quick. Yeah,
There we
sorry.
go.
Yeah, okay. So I
No,
did want to
no,
address
it's
it.
all good. There we go. There we go.
Okay,
There's
so I understand what this sentiment though, but the thing is though, when
actually,
it comes
before you go, I just want to read the comment just in case anybody's listening to this without seeing the actual comment on the screen. Because I know some people listen to this with like headphones and stuff as they're working and everything. I just want to read the comment here. Nikki Haley, and this is by Nicholas 187069. He says Nikki Haley needs to be or rather, Nikki Haley needs to put her bootlicking or her Trump bootlicking behind her. If I had my way, I'd let her be first be Secretary of State under Biden before she runs in 2024. In other words, kind of alluding to what I was saying, how earlier on I thought that it would be kind of an interesting move if Biden picked Mitt Romney to be Secretary of State, have a bipartisan cabinet to try to win over independents, that sort of thing. But yeah,
the problem is so to address this comment in particular, the number one, a bipartisan cabinet doesn't seem like super likely. I think the only thing Biden would actually do would probably put like a centrist, like anyone who's maybe like an independent or a centrist. That's probably how far to the right he's going to go. I can't see him putting like an actual Republican in like a cabinet executive position. I feel like that would really turn away a lot of the progressive voters. And like you could do the math calculations of like, okay, like how many never Trumpers versus how many progressives will actually not turn out to vote. I think Biden wants to just unify the party. At best, if you can find a good centrist, that's as far right as he's going to go. I just can't see him go any further right to that. And to address the other point in this comment, when it comes to Nikki Haley, now, I used to be really critical of her, but I've actually kind of changed my mind a little bit on this. I think for Nikki Haley, for her political expedience, she has to probably toe the line a little bit until probably closer to 2024. Unfortunately, if she wants to win the Republican nomination, unfortunately, it's like that. Yeah. I really hate it, and I think she should criticize him more afterwards. Yeah. But in order to win, you have to do some bad stuff like that. Yeah, you have to drain the swamp, and it's not nice. It's really dirty. Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, to make a more, obviously a more extreme analogy. I'm not comparing them to the situation, but Khrushchev had to follow Stalin's orders. He was able to denounce Stalin afterwards, but if he had been critical earlier on, he wouldn't have been in the party anymore. And with Nikki Haley,
he would be executed.
Yeah, basically. And with Nikki Haley, she wouldn't get executed, but she'd get the Mitt Romney treatment, where all the conservative media would call her a lifelong Democrat and a communist if she attacked Trump right now. Whereas if she can wait and hold her tongue until she's the leader, then all of those Trump MAGA fanboys will now be following her and say that she's the face of the party. Because Mitt Romney, he came out and he was bold, but from the standpoint of his political career, to have a chance at the presidency, it was too soon, because he'll always be remembered as the man who triggered Trump's fan base. Whereas Nikki Haley, she has to win them over, and then she can mold them afterwards.
Right. And I would say to one last point on that, like, I think the way she's dealt with the coronavirus is actually kind of interesting, how calculated she is, right? Like, because on one hand, she'll say on Fox News to criticize Donald Trump, to show distinction is that she will say like, "Hey, Trump needs to listen to his advisors more. He needs to do stuff like that." Like she'll do some small critiques, but then later she will say that like, "Hey, we need to help Taiwan. We need to go after the WHO in China and stuff like that." So she's very careful, and I think it's interesting. I mean, you can argue like maybe she could do a little bit better, but that seems to be the line of how she's towing, I guess. Like she's just being very
Yeah.
tactical when it comes to
Yeah,
this,
she's
and
being
she's very
tactical.
careful. She's very careful with her wording too. Like that's the thing, because she wants to be able to like. I think she does want to run for president.
Yeah, yeah, she's too tactful and she's too careful and she toes the line too much. Well, let's keep it real. We all know that she has some disagreements with Trump. The only reason why she's doing that, because Mitt Romney, he's been pretty honest. Why? Because he doesn't really plan on running for president. But if she wants, I mean, because it's not just about personal ambition. If you're a Chapo kind of guy, you could say, oh, it's just because she wants the power and the prestige or whatever. Okay, well, no, I think it's because she wants her agenda through. And that means having to toe the line right now for another 4 years, right? I mean, that's kind of how politics go, right? Because if she's in charge, some underling under her that's like a Trump type will have to pretend to be a hawk or whatever for a few years, So it goes both ways, right? So
right, yeah. I think the other thing too is it'll be interesting to see if she does run for president, who her VP would be. So it's gonna be really. I think these next 4 years, even if Trump does come into power again for the second time, I think it's gonna be interesting to see the language of how the Republican Party is gonna change. It's not gonna be at the beginning, but I think towards like 2023, maybe late 2022, I think the Republicans will probably change some of their language towards Trump a little bit. As his political power goes down, I think that's when we will see a rise in critiquing him, and then we'll really know then of like what's the direction of the party, because
well that's
I'm
what
kind of
happened
scared.
with Bush. That's what happened
Yeah.
with Bush. Like right around 2008, 2009, Bush was unpopular by that point, but he was losing popularity within his own party too. Now, I've given Bush credit in that respect because I personally believe that Bush was the kind of guy that when he left and he got in the helicopter and he walked off into the sunset, he knew he did the right thing given his time in office, and he didn't really seem to care too much. Kind of like how Bolton probably wouldn't care too much how popular he was as long as he gets his agenda through, whereas with a Trump type figure or something, it's going to be a lot different because Trump is going to get very triggered when they start criticizing him, because Bush didn't really seem to care. He was like, yeah, they see I'm on my way out, whatever, like, just live and let live or whatever. Whereas with Trump, he's going to start making a lot new nicknames for like Lindsey Graham and all these guys that used to sing his praise. And now that they see that he's on the way out and no matter what, he can't be president again, he's going to call them like turncoats and backstabbers.
Turncoats.
He's going to call them rats. He's going to call them rats, and he's going to call them, traitors and everything else. And by that point, like all the nicknames are just going to be so old and dilute and meaningless, and it'll just seem like the ramblings of just an old, washed up reality TV circus clown. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna be really hard though, like to vision anyone else who can probably unify the Republican Party. I mean, Trump kind of came out of nowhere, but he was like kind of like a celebrity in a lot of ways. But I think it's like for other people, like there's other people that can run for the Republican Party that might have a decent shot, but I just don't see it. Like Marco Rubio, like I just don't see him like winning the nomination at all. I think he's too much like a robot. So
I mean, can I just say something on Marco Rubio? Like, I'll always remember the day when you made this big, grandiose speech against Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's, position, trying to go for the position. He made this big speech against Russia. Then Marco Rubio votes for Rex Tillerson. And it's the same thing. This guy's he likes to do a lot of grandstanding, but when it comes down to the real, what really matters, he's completely just like, okay, I'll vote for the guy, even though I've just criticized him publicly. So he's the kind of guy who, because he's so interested in his own career, and his longevity, he will just go with whatever does for his own survival. He doesn't really have much principles except for his own survival.
I read an article a couple years ago that apparently back in 2010, I think, or maybe it was 2008 or whatever, whenever Marco Rubio first ran for his Senate or his public office, and what happened was, like, a lot of people saw him as like this Reaganite kind of person, but they saw him kind of feckless. You know, like when it came to like Libya, I guess, and like some other places, like I guess he wasn't like really that hawkish. You know, like he really, like, he's known to like switch his positions a lot with who's ever popular. Like he's only gonna do it if it keeps his popularity too. But like the thing is with Marco Rubio is obviously like he's better in some sense that he's not like a populist. But the thing is, though, if everyone in the room agrees with one thing, then he will agree with them too. Like he's just kind of feckless like that, and then that's why I don't really like Marco Rubio so much.
As I said before, I used to think that Marco Rubio is like, what neocons kind of, or what the hawks kind of need in the government, and I thought, because he's young, he'll get more of that stuff done on foreign policy. But then I just look at how he votes. Like you can know where you can actually look up how senators and Congress people actually vote in terms of resolutions and decisions and like that. And he's consistently voted for everything that he once criticized against. So when he made that big speech against Rex Tillerson's, getting the potential of getting the Secretary of State position, he voted for Rex Tillerson. It's the same. He keeps voting for the things that he criticizes, which to me, it only shows me that he's just, solely a career politician, solely does not really give a shit really for certain things. He's more just, okay, I'll do whatever is good for the popular party for my own position, and that's pretty much it.
Right, and it's like if we're gonna have hawks in the Republican Party, they have to be able to like stand their ground and be like, hey, like we're here, we're bold, and we're gonna make a decision.
Yeah,
so,
but then you got to remember though, Anthony, though, that when a hawk does come to power, like Nikki Haley, and she does stuff that would really right now get under the skin of like a Nick Fuentes type, may not him because he'll be a nobody by then, but not Charlie Kirk, but like somebody who's more paleocon type within the party, they're going to have to bite their tongue and they're going to have to sing the praises of Haley, even though they disagree with her on the far paleocon stuff and the isolationism, because she's the leader. I'm convinced that they're kind of a party of follow the leader, and right now Trump's the leader and they sing his praise. But then if Marco Rubio's the leader, all the people that would have been siding with Trump are now going to have to vote for the things that Marco Rubio wants. Like, and I think that they know that the party's like that. So they figure I'll just go along with the leader now so that when I'm the leader, I can get what I want through. I think, and Anthony mentioned the sort of careerism of it. I think especially with somebody like Marco Rubio, it's kind of obvious, it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that, you just disagree with him on everything because he's doing it for his career. You can still have common ground. It's just at the end of the day,
course.
every politician has ego. And they all kind of want to be famous, right? Like it takes an ego to be in that line of work, right?
But I understand that. But my big issue is just, I really, you can do the grandstanding. I expect politicians to do the grandstanding. But the thing is, like, if you look at a Biden, for example, there's actually substance to his grandstanding, for example. There's substance to what he says, and there's substance that you'll vote in the direction in which he's saying his position. What I don't like about Rubio is he makes this big grandstanding, especially when it came to the Rex Tillerson position. And then he votes for Rex Tillerson, which it just, you can do that. I understand that the nature of politics is you do grandstanding and you do the whole thing for your whole career and like that. But there's something that just edges me the wrong way when you make a big speech and then you vote the opposite, really. Because then, at least if you're going to do the big speech, vote at least in the way that your speech, sort of hints at.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that's ultimately true, and it would be a better thing if people were more consistent. And you're right, it definitely makes people lose respect for you if if you go and do that. Like, I mean, because people can evolve, people can change their views, but if you're changing 180 in like the span of a couple months or whatever, that's
Well,
grifty, right? So
Well, not only that though, but like especially when it comes to people like Marco Rubio, he's always about like being tough on Iran, being tough on China and Russia.
yeah,
He does this whole thing. I've watched all of his Senate stuff and whatnot, all these speeches and everything he's written. He says nothing when Trump has chocolate cake with Xi. Nothing, nothing. Do you hear him? Nothing.
yeah,
Not even a peep. And it's like, well, dude, like if you're gonna make all these speeches about like how Iran and China and Russia are all these state sponsored for terrorism, can you at least like speak out at least like once or twice, like at least ever? Like, dude,
yeah.
it's almost like if Trump is not even there. Like he talks as if like he's not even the president, which is I don't know, like it's just kind of weird to me. Like
Kevin, our Israeli friend in the chat wants to
Yeah.
go on.
No, I see that Adine is asking if he can come on. The thing is, I want to wrap up this stream
I see.
basically because the problem is I have to be up very early for work tomorrow. I have to be at work at 8 a.m. So it's like I realistically need to be in bed pretty soon. But there is good news here though, which is that I'm trading off doing those longer streams like twice a week where you go like 5 or 7 hours for I'm basically going to be streaming every day from now on because I can stream unlimited hours now with premium. So I'll be streaming tomorrow night, for example, around the same time. So of course you're welcome to come on, and Dean, we've had you on before. It's always good having you on, but that does lead me to, I said about half an hour ago I wanted to keep this between the 2 to 2.5 hour mark. We're at 2:15 right now. I think we're going to close it out, but I want to give everybody in the stream the chance to make their closing remarks and let the audience know we still have 22 people watching where they can follow you and keep up with your work.
Okay, I'll start.
We'll start with Anthony Avistu Bisson.
Okay. I'm Anthony Bisson. I'm a freelance writer, actually. I contribute to a number of outlets such as the Jerusalem Post, Aria Magazine, and The Region. You can find me, I guess, on Twitter at capital S, lowercase TOIC, capital V, lowercase IPER, or at Stoke Viper on Twitter, or you can contact me at anthonyavistubison@gmail.com. I have a website called philosophyismagic.com, but that's more like a catalog of my material. But I mostly write on the Middle East, and my area of focus is on foreign policy and the MENA region. So, yes.
Oh, wonderful. No, thanks for coming on and everything, Anthony. Before we go to the next guest, I just want to address Adine's question here, asking what time exactly tomorrow. I'm trying to keep the streams consistently at 9 p.m. Pacific time, 12 a.m. Eastern. That's about the earliest that I can manage with my schedule because I'm in the Pacific time zone, and going to usually between 11 p.m. / 2 a.m. Eastern to 11:30 / 2:30 Eastern. That sort of time frame. If at any point you're able to make it to that, I'd love to have you on. It's always a good discussion with you, and thanks for being in the chat tonight. We're going to go to Jay from the War Kettle next.
Oh, yeah. Well, I am. Thank you as always for having me on, Kevin. I appreciate it. Go to my channel, War Kettle. But more importantly, go help Kevin out. Go sub to his channel. Go fucking hit him up on Patreon. Show Kevin your love.
No, thanks, man. Yeah. No, I mean, do it if you care about changing the political discourse and whatnot. This is the type of conversation you'll never find on the mainstream media. The whole pandemic response is always just tally up the number of people who died, show acts of heroism, show communities coming together, show grieving and whatnot. But there's never really a discussion of what are we going to do about the source of the problem, which is China, right? But we talk about that here. We go there here. So, and that's the thing. And we try to keep it, honest. We've all got our different perspectives, but we're not out here to tout some sort of narrative or whatever. We're out here to call things as we see them, right? But that leads us here to Henry. So feel free to give your closing remarks, Henry.
Yeah, I don't really have many closing remarks, I guess. I don't know. I have a new YouTube channel. It's American Madhouse. You can probably find it by searching it, I would assume. I don't know. Or go to my Twitter, which is Henry Harper, I think. And yeah, my channel is just a collection of random videos, basically. I've been doing a lot of streams. I'll probably upload some other videos into the summer more. I'll probably do more actual videos. I might upload some from my old channels, but yeah, until then, I'll probably just be doing streams and random bullshit, no real theme on that channel other than just mayhem and madness, I guess. So
oh man,
that's
there's a
about
lot
it.
of that. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there.
Oh yeah, it's a
Interesting
wide
debate.
variety of things. I don't really know. It's mostly just streams, and then I have like 2 videos I made, and then the one crazy ass debate with a crazy weird person, and also a debate that you kind of an impromptu debate with you and that same person. So
And Reese,
you and
yeah.
Reese and like 5 other people. I don't even remember. It was and I was pretty drunk in that one. I don't even remember
Oh man,
a lot of
you
it.
had a good time. You had a good time. We
Oh
were
yeah,
all
it was
like, I mean,
entertaining.
Reese and I, we were losing it near the end. We were like, this.
Yeah, I had to kick him
especially
out because y'all were getting noticeably angry.
when he called me a white
Understandably, yeah, he called you white supremacist.
Yeah,
Understandable.
that's what I was done.
I kicked them because you guys were like, "Oh fuck you, motherfucker," or whatever. But yeah, so it's stuff like that. It's terrible, low quality content, I guess, is what you could put it as. So if you like that, you can go check it out.
Oh man. Well, thanks for coming on, Henry.
Yeah,
we'll go
thanks
to
for having
Anthony
me.
Roberto. Oh yeah. Yeah, anytime. We'll go to
Hi.
Anthony Roberto.
Hi, yeah. So I've been on here quite a lot. I guess if you really want to contact me, I go by Global Affairs on Twitter. I have the same avatar to keep it consistent, across platforms. Currently, I guess, I am in school for a bachelor's of arts in geopolitical studies, and I'm probably going to minor in national security, at least broadly, so I can try to at least try to get a job at like the State Department. So like that's where I'm coming from. And then I would say to that is, yeah. So I mean, it's been fun. It's interesting to see different people's perspective. I guess also between different types of interventionists too. Between hawks, because it's like everyone on Twitter is like, oh well, all hawks are the same. They're all neocons. It's like that's not true. Just because you say you're an interventionist doesn't necessarily mean you're a neoconservative or this or that. So a lot of people don't know what that really means, and I think it's at least good to at least see people debate on here, have show different ideas and whatnot, because you could be a hawk from different perspectives, from different political leanings, and I think that's something that Kevin here is trying to foster. We could all be against. We could all be against China.
No, for sure. For sure. And like I was saying earlier, I was crediting our newest patron of the channel, Wyatt Claypool, for example. He's a more conservative hawk or interventionist than myself, for example. And so we got people from various strands of political, economic, social views, or even, as we were talking about earlier, multilateral or unilateral focus and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we're all kind of concerned with how can we ultimately make the world a more prosperous, secure, and democratic place, right? So.
Right. Yeah. So I think that is I think that's a good way to leave off. And I appreciate you for having me on the stream, Kevin.
Yeah, like I said, anytime. That goes to everybody here, and of course the Dean we've had on before. And so he says 7 a.m. for his time because of course he's in Israel and whatnot. But and Jay is on the same time zone, I believe, right, Jay?
We are indeed.
Yeah.
It's just like a little smidgen across the river. It's like a river from me, just across right there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I just want to also end off with is that I do encourage listeners just to be please more active in terms of just don't be passive listeners. if you hear something that you want to research, please look it up. Make sure you're not just like listening and receiving and, just accepting. You got to be critical in terms of your thought process regarding what you listen to. So it's very important when you listen to our podcast, whether you're working or whatever you're doing, just to make sure that you know that what we're talking about, you have the understanding of it, and you do your research to follow up so you can form your own opinion, your own views. I guess that's what I would encourage at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, and I would concur with that 100%, because that's the thing, right? Especially, and I've had that happen before where I'm doing something, I might be washing the dishes or whatever, and I'm listening to somebody that I like to listen to, and you kind of lose track of listening cognizantly the whole time, and then you're like, wait. Oh, right. I didn't exactly agree with that. I'm going to have to go back and watch that again. And here's the thing. If you come in the chat and you post a comment disagreeing with us, as long as it's respectful and whatnot, like, I'll highlight it. We'll have a discussion, right? So,
Right.
But yeah. But yes, to close that out then, we're just going to wrap this up here. We've gone to about as long as I'd like to have these streams go. But like I said, going to try to aim for every day now. We'll have different guests and we'll have different perspectives and everything. But we got a different format here. Different aesthetics, much more swag going on. With the premium StreamYard. And I look forward to seeing all of you either in the chat or on the panel again to, future streams. So thank you for watching and have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good morning. Kalimera.